Christmas is just around the corner, and while many may be done with their Christmas DIYs, if you're still looking for decorations that can take you beyond 2022, then look no further. These fun velvet and amber DIY projects capitalize on the interior trends for 2023. This is Imari from Always Utori. Let's create some enchantment. This holiday season, I've been inspired by the Christmas tradition of velvet paired with an up-and-coming trend, amber glass. I saw some beautiful tablescapes on Pinterest highlighting amber glass and also liked how elegant touches of velvet could be. While woodland and candyland have been popular Christmas themes this year, in the coming years, browns and neutrals will grow in popularity, bringing a more sophisticated palette to holiday celebrations. So this Christmas, I'm combining velvet and deep brown and red hues with amber-colored accents to create a velvet and amber-themed Christmas. I have used a mix of inspirations to create these DIY projects. This is a two-part video. In this video, I will show you how to make velvet and amber-inspired holiday crafts, and in the second video, I will show you how I used what I made to decorate my home for the holidays. That video will be linked in the description. Without further ado, here's the first project. The first project is amber glass ornaments. I saw this craft on Pinterest by the blog Craftberry Bush, but I ended up doing it differently than she did. Here on YouTube, Lone Fox has a video where he did something similar using alcohol inks, so that is the method I went with. I got shatterproof baubles from Dollar Tree. They came in a 2-pack, and I got 7, making 14 total baubles. I found this set of alcohol inks for $13.99 on Amazon. It has a nice variety of different brown shades, which I thought would be perfect to create amber-colored ornaments. This was my first time working with alcohol inks, so the first thing I did was swatch them so I could tell what kind of colors I was working with. Out of all the colors in the variety pack, I ended up using Spice the most. It created the perfect amber shade, which is what I was going for. I tried 2 different methods to create these baubles. The first method I tried was putting the alcohol ink on the inside of the bauble. This was most similar to the method that Craftberry Bush used, the only difference being that she used glass baubles and a special kind of paint that worked with glass. I found that when I put the alcohol ink on the inside of the bauble, I wasn't able to get as much variation in color as I was hoping. All the inks just blended together when I put them on the inside of the bauble, and I couldn't control where certain colors were going to get that variation of dark and light. So then I used the second method, where I put alcohol ink on the outside of the bauble using a paper towel to blend in a little bit, and that worked a lot better for controlling how the colors showed up and getting that color variation of dark and light, and it looked a little bit more like the amber glass look that I was going for. I ended up using a combination of both methods on all of the baubles. I liked that when I put the color on the inside, it gave it a more uniform look, and then I was able to go on the outside and add some of those darker color variations. The only downside is that when you put color on the inside, it takes a lot longer to dry than it does when you put it on the outside. So alcohol ink actually dries pretty quickly, and I found when I put it on the inside of the bauble, it would pool on certain sides, and then I had to move it around and to get the color to sort of go around the bauble uniformly. So here I'm putting the lids back onto the baubles, and I'm adding some alcohol ink on the outsides to give it a burnished, sort of antique metallic look. What's great about this project is that every bauble turns out differently. It's up to chance, up to your own creativity, and up to the different colors that you use, and in the end you get a beautiful amber looking glass. So now I'm going to speed through as I complete the rest of the ornaments. So you can see here that on some of the baubles that I did alcohol ink on the inside, it ended up drying slightly weird, and it created a speckled pattern on the inside. So I had to go back on the outside and put color so it looked amber all the way around. And here are the finished baubles. I think they turned out beautifully, and I love seeing all the different patterns I was able to create with the alcohol ink. The next project is the velvet wrapped ornament. I was inspired by the ornaments I found at the at-home store, and it gave me the idea to try overlapping velvet to create a wrapped velvet ornament. In addition, I bought the red velvet ornaments from At Home, which were $1.99 each. I wanted to get the green ones as well, but they were sold out when I went back to get them, so it seems like they were popular this year. In any case, I tried my hand at making my own version of a velvet ornament that incorporated both a velvet and amber theme. I got a variety of ribbon from both Hobby Lobby and Amazon. I was looking for rich browns and amber tones, however, there wasn't much selection available. Because of that, I ended up not having enough ribbon to do all of the projects that I wanted to do, so I had to pare back some of my ideas. Like I said before, my first idea was to overlap the ribbon on the ornaments. However, I ended up just cutting 4 pieces to put around the ornament. I used a little bit of hot glue at the top and bottom of the ornament to secure the ribbon, and then overlapped each additional piece that I added on top of the last piece. So then I wanted to test how the alcohol inks would look on the ornaments, and I ended up liking it. I decided to do 2 variations, one with alcohol ink and velvet, and the other plain but with velvet ribbon. Here you can see what I was talking about earlier, where I overlap the 4 pieces on the bottom so that you can't see where it starts or begins. Then I did the same thing to the one with alcohol ink. Then I decided to add alcohol ink to the smaller ornaments, which dripped down into the grooves and made a really interesting amber metallic look. By the way, something I forgot to mention was that I got these ornaments from Dollar Tree. Here are the final ornaments. As you can see, I used varying shades of velvet ribbon, which added variety to the ornaments. I think both variations turned out nice, but I like the ones with alcohol ink a little bit better. Which do you prefer? The next project was inspired by Canterbury Cottage here on YouTube. She made a Christmas tree out of old Coke cans. I also saw several glass and metallic Christmas trees in the at-home store, so I thought I could recreate an amber-colored tree using Canterbury Cottage's can idea. You can use construction paper or cardstock to create a cone, tape or glue the cone together, and then use scissors to cut the bottom of the cone so that it will stand evenly. I used a standard 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, which made a medium-sized tree. You can play with paper sizes to make larger or smaller Christmas trees. Next, you're going to need some aluminum cans. I ended up needing 4.5 cans, but I started out with only 4. Using a can opener, I cut off the top of the cans. Be careful while you're doing this, as the edges of the cans can be sharp. Then I used scissors to cut down the center of the can and cut off the bottom of the can. Finally, use the scissors to cut the top part of the can so that you have a flat sheet of aluminum. Do this for the rest of the cans. Now you need to cut out little leaf shapes. It doesn't matter if they're uniform, but I tried to make smaller ones for the top of the tree and larger ones for the bottom of the tree. I can't say how many leaves you'll need, but I ended up gluing them on and then cutting them out as I needed more. And like I said before, I started with 4 cans but ended up needing half of another can. With the hot glue gun, I began to glue the leaves to the top of the cone. Moving around the cone, I then glued more leaves in between the gaps and filled the tree all the way to the bottom. I also used my fingers to slightly curl the leaf outward as I placed it on the cone. I thought this added a nice shape to the tree overall. So now I'm taking some thin pieces of aluminum and gluing them to the top of the tree. This covers the hole where the cone is and makes the tree look a little more realistic. With the tree finally done, it's time to paint. I used alcohol inks once again to color the tree. I dripped the ink all along the tree and used a brush to paint down the sides to distribute the color. Just be careful because the aluminum tends to fling the ink all over the place. So be careful of splattering other items around your workspace. And here is the final product. I love how it looks like weathered metal. You can really see the different colors meld together and it gives it that amber and tortoiseshell print type of look. The next project is another Christmas tree, this time inspired by a tree I saw in the at-home store. I loved this modern cone tree made with string and thought I could do something similar with velvet ribbon. I found this at the Dollar Tree and thought the form underneath would be perfect to build my new Christmas tree on top of. I unwrapped the tinsel from the form and then used it as the base for my ribbon. So like I mentioned previously, I ended up not having enough ribbon to do all the projects that I wanted to do, and this was the project I realized that on. Because I was trying to copy the string tree I saw from at home, I had originally wanted to do the tree in the same color. Once I realized there wasn't enough ribbon, I improvised by doing an ombre effect. Even then, I didn't have enough ribbon to cover the whole tree, so I had to change the color once again and do green on the backside of the tree. Even though that wasn't what I planned to do initially, I think it turned out well and created an interesting ombre effect. So here I'm just measuring and lining up the colors to see how I want to do it. I lined up the ribbon and then cut it to make sure it measured correctly, and I made sure to leave a little bit of space at the bottom so that it could wrap around the bottom ring of the tree. So then I used the hot glue gun to attach the ribbon to the bottom of the tree and then to the top of the tree, and I made sure to overlap the ribbon on top of one another so that you couldn't really see through the tree form. As the ribbon goes up the tree, it overlaps a lot more at the top. This is unavoidable, but just make sure that you keep the ribbons going in the same direction so that it looks neat and tidy when you're finished. I found that as I got closer to finishing, it was easier to start at the bottom and glue all of the pieces of ribbon and then to attach them at the top. This helped me to keep the ribbons going in the same direction without getting confused about which pieces went where and keeping the whole tree looking tidy. As I started coming in from the other side, I changed the direction of the ribbon so that it would meet in the center, creating a V in the back of the tree. And here I'm deciding how I want to finish the tree off. I'm playing with different trim colors, and I ended up going with the brown. I attached that to the bottom of the tree with hot glue gun, and then I did the same on the back side with a green piece of trim, or just leftover ribbon. And unfortunately, I didn't notice that my tree was a little bit too tall for the frame, but here I'm trying to figure out how I want to finish the top off. So the next couple shots you can't really see what I'm doing, but I ended up wrapping a thin piece of ribbon on the top to cover up all of the glue, and then I added a couple of bells, which you'll see in the final shots. And here is the finished tree. You can slightly see through the tree, which mimics the original inspiration picture with the very thin strings. but the ribbon is still thick enough to cover the tree form, and I think it still turned out nice even though it didn't go the way I originally envisioned. Okay, we're getting close to the end. This is the second to last project, and it is a series of garlands. I didn't have a strong inspiration for this beyond incorporating the velvet and amber theme. I noticed that wood beaded garlands have been fairly common in stores, and I got the idea to mimic a tortoiseshell print with multicolored wood beads. When I started this project, I wasn't sure how it was all going to come together, so I ended up starting with some bells that I got from the Dollar Tree. I used alcohol ink to give them a more weathered and antique look, although the alcohol ink didn't stick as well to the surface of the bells as they did some of the other projects. However, I still think that it gave it enough of a weathered look and diminished some of the shininess of the bells. So here's my pro tip. I found that soap and water didn't remove the pigment from the alcohol inks as easily as just using alcohol did. So if you have some rubbing alcohol on hand or alcohol wipes, that will help you get the alcohol ink off your fingers once you're finished. So like I said, I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to go with the garland, so here I'm just playing with different ribbon to see if any of them are speaking to me or how I might want to incorporate ribbon into the garland. I ended up not using the ribbon in this way, but you'll see how I incorporate it later on in the video. I ended up using twine that I had around the house to create the beaded garland. However, as I went along with the project, I found that the twine shredded quite a lot as I beaded the garland, so you might have better luck using a string or something a little less prone to shredding. I measured the length of the twine to the mantle where I was going to place it and then cut the string there. I started the garland by securing a bell at the end so that the rest of the beads wouldn't fall off. And then I proceeded to bead in random colors. I wasn't really doing a pattern or anything, but I just wanted to mimic the tortoiseshell print, so it didn't really matter if it was dark or light, but I placed 6 beads between every bell. When I started the garland, I tied a knot on the first bell, but as I attached the rest of the bells, I just strung it onto the string and I didn't tie a knot. And then I proceeded to put the rest of the beads on the garland. I definitely think that if you had a beader tool, that would make this process a lot easier. And since I was using twine, the beader tool might also stop it from shredding as much, but I didn't have that, so you can watch me struggle as I try to get the string inside the beads. And one final thing that I forgot to mention was that I got these beads from Amazon for $12.99. So here I'm attaching the final bell. You can see that by this point the twine was so shredded I ended up having to tie an extender piece in order to get the last bell on there. That part had actually fallen off previously, but it didn't take away from the original amount that I had measured, but I ended up having to tie it back on and it worked out. But yeah, definitely I would recommend using something a little sturdier than twine. Okay, so here's the final garland, part 1. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you how I made the second part of the garland, but I like how the wooden beads turned out, and I think it worked well to mimic a tortoiseshell print. So at first, I was going to stick to just that garland, but then I found these glass beads I had in my house. They originally went to a chandelier, but we weren't using them, so I thought they would work well to create an amber glass garland. I attached these deep copper bells that I got from Dollar Tree in between each string of beads, and I attached all the beads. They just had a little hook on the end, and so that's how I strung them together. And you can see on the end there I had pre-tested how the glass beads would take alcohol ink, and it worked pretty well. So right now I'm just stringing it together, and then in a few minutes I'm going to paint them with alcohol ink. found that in this case, it was a little easier to apply the alcohol ink to the brush and then pat it onto the beads rather than put the alcohol ink directly on the beads because it sort of bled through more. So the brush helped me to apply the paint more evenly across the surface and give it a more uniform amber look. Then I went back and added a few darker spots so that it would have color variation and look a little bit more like amber glass. And here's the final amber glass bead garland. Even though this garland wasn't planned from the beginning, I think it's a great addition to the previous garland I made. And please ignore that piece of tape on the mantle. It's very old, it's been there for a long time, and it's really stuck on there and I couldn't get it off, so just ignore that. Here's the final project. This was inspired by the Daily DIYer here on YouTube. She has a great video about different ways to use Dollar Tree's mini Christmas trees, and I loved her centerpiece idea, so here's my take on it. So of course, I got these mini Christmas trees from Dollar Tree, and what you're going to do is attach two of them together. I used a combination of twine because it's what I had on hand, and then I used hot glue to make sure it was extra secure. I believe the Daily DIYer used wire, but you can use whatever you have on hand at home. So I'm fluffing the tree out a little bit, and then I'm testing to see what kind of ribbon I want to use in the center of this piece. So here's where I use the hot glue to attach the two trees together and make sure that they don't move around because the twine wasn't secure enough. And here I'm testing out another piece of ribbon I found and trying to figure out how I want to tie the bow. Honestly, I don't tie bows that often, so I watched several YouTube videos, and then after I finished this project, I found a few more and thought I could have done a better job on the bow, but that's okay. I will link to a few of those videos in the description box, as well as all the products that I've mentioned that aren't from Dollar Tree and any other videos or YouTubers that I've shouted out during this video. So the red ribbon was a scrap piece that I had lying around from previous years. It has a velvet applique on top, and so I thought it definitely fit in with the velvet theme. And then I layered another green velvet ribbon I bought from Hobby Lobby on top of it to make this two-layered bow. And essentially what I did to make the bow was to create 3 loops and pinch them with my fingers together. Then I used some twine to secure that, and then cut a smaller piece of ribbon so that I could wrap it around where the twine is so it hides that nicely and looks like a pretty bow. So after I glued that centerpiece on the bow, I cut some ducktails in the bottom of the ribbon, but I found out later it's much easier to do this by folding the ribbon in half and then cutting at an angle. And then I used a little bit of hot glue to secure both ribbons together so that they don't shift around too much. Then finally I glued the bow on top of both of the trees right in the center. Then I took some of the ornaments that I made previously and began arranging them on top of the 2 trees to see how I wanted them to be, and then eventually I used hot glue to secure them to the tree. And here's the final product. All in all, this was a pretty simple project, and you can use it as either a hanging wreath or a centerpiece on a table. Now that all the projects are finished, I wanted to show how I put the garland all together. I wanted to make sure that I incorporated velvet ribbon in some way. When I held the ribbon across the mantle, however, it started to twist and I didn't think it looked nice. Because the ribbon was twisting, I decided to wrap it around the garland I made instead, which I thought added a really nice detail and got that pop of velvet in the garland. After I got the velvet ribbon wrapped around the first garland, I cut it so that it would be the right length. Then I added another velvet ribbon, and based off of the trouble I had with the first ribbon, I decided maybe twisting it wouldn't be a bad idea. So I twisted this one until I thought it looked pretty, and then hung it up next to the other garland. Then I added the glass bead garland and arranged them until I thought it looked nice. I decorated the mantle with amber glass bottles that I got from Amazon, 6 for $18.99. Then I decorated the mantle with a mix of ornaments I made in this video, as well as some of the ornaments I bought from at home, and a few other things I had around the house. If you want to see how I used the DIY projects I made in this video to decorate the rest of my house, then check out part 2 of this 2-part series. The link to that video will be in the description box, as well as links to other products and videos mentioned. Thank you so much for watching. Happy holidays! If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing, or leaving a comment. I'd love to know which project was your favorite, or if you plan to do any of these projects yourself.